Then the next topic we're going to discuss is the vacation days and the vacation allowance. Vacation days is probably something you are all used to, but the vacation allowance is quite typically Dutch. And we're going to discuss the vacation days first. And there are two types of vacation days, or actually three types. You have the legal vacation days, the extra legal vacation days, and the national holidays. So the legal days is the bare minimum an employee has a right to. And this is, once again, this is legislation. So this is from Book 7 of the Code of Conduct. If a CLA is applicable, it could be that different rules apply. But we discuss the legislation here, so you know, because most companies do not fall under a collective labor agreement. But keep in mind, if you do, there can be a deviation. That's also with the probation period. It could even be longer in a CLA. But the legal minimum is 4 times the employee's working hours in a week. So the most common calculation, if an employee works for 40 hours a week, it will be 4 times 40, which is 160, and 160 is 20 days a year. So it's per calendar year. The minimum amount would be 20 days. These days, you should encourage employees to take all these days within 1 calendar year, because the vacation is there, to get yourself energized again and be there, working hard. So the idea is that people take it within that year. But there is an exception, or there is a possibility to take over the days you have left to the next year, but they will lapse after half a year. So after July 1st, the days of the previous calendar year will lapse. So that is important to also inform your employees hereof, because if they don't know, they might come back to you and say, well, I didn't know. The only exception would be if an employee really does not have the chance to take these days. For example, if 3 colleagues have left the company and everyone needs to work really hard to keep the company on its feet, and they're just not allowed to go on holiday, you cannot say after July 1st, sorry, they lapsed. But you do have to have a good reason for that to do that. The extra legal entitlement, that is usually 3 to 5 days per calendar year extra. That is the industry norm. They are not mandatory to give. They are extra. But most companies here in the Netherlands, they do tend to give some extra days on top of the 20. And they are, as I said, extra legal days, and they can be carried over as well. But they only lapse after 5 years after the year they were accrued. So if you accrue them in 2019, you have 5 years after, at the beginning of 2020, before they lapse. And lastly, we have the national holidays, which are approximately 7 to 8 days per calendar year. Christmas, Session Day, Easter, those kind of days. You're all familiar with them. Yeah, the industry norm here is to pay them out, to give employees paid time off, but it's not mandatory, so you don't have to. The vacation allowance, that is the second thing, because you have vacation, but you also need money to go on vacation. So that's why the Dutch government decided long ago that you need extra salary to compensate you to actually go on holiday. And that is the industry norm, or not the industry norm, the legal amount is 8%. It can be higher, you can decide on a higher amount, but minimum is 8%. And a CLA could also deviate again from this percentage. It is over their gross annual salary. So you have to be careful if you, for example, work with a bonus. We always advise to mention if that bonus, if it's going to be paid out, if that is already inclusive of the holiday allowance or not. Because if you don't mention anything, it goes on top of their gross annual salary. A vacation days or vacation allowance will need to be paid over this amount again. There are options to already include in the employment contract that the salary you agree to is inclusive of this 8%, but it needs to be in writing. If it's not there, people will argue positively that it's going to be on top of that. So that is also the tip below. Really be clear about that when you are talking to a potential candidate. If you are talking about salary, mention if it is inclusive or excluding this 8% allowance, because otherwise you might have a verbal deal on 5,000 euros a month, and then they come a week later, okay, that's exclusive of 8%, even though your budget did not go beyond that 5,000. So be clear about that. So a higher percentage can be agreed upon, have that in writing as well. And the moment of payout is usually once a year in the month of May. It needs to be ultimately in the month of June, so 1 month later, but most companies pay it out in May. It is also possible to pay it out every month, just 8% on top of their gross monthly salary, and have it paid out every month. And then they don't have an additional amount in May. That's up to the company, but also here, be clear about it, communicate it, have it in writing. If an employee's salary exceeds 3 times the minimum wage, it is possible to deviate from the 8% pay. This is very uncommon. Most companies don't do it, or they mention that already the amount agreed upon is inclusive of the 8%, and then you have it covered as well.